Let's talk about Photoshop layers. So Photoshop layers are analogous to drawing on sheets of acetate. There's a stacking order, and we have objects that can be placed on top of one another within one document. So each object that I create in Photoshop exists on its own layer. You can have a maximum of 8,000 layers. So I have my layer panel up right here, and you can imagine if you had 8,000 layers. Of course, that's dependent on the resources that you have available. So basically we can say layers are endless, that it's basically limited by your computer memory. So I've got a file here open that has 3 layers at the moment. So if you don't see your layers panel, you'll want to go under Window and look at all of your panels that are available and make sure that you have a check mark next to layers that will bring layers up. Alright, so I'm going to actually drag my layer panel. I'm going to drag it off of the dock and place it here next to my document so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we have 3 layers, like I said. I'm going to turn off, we'll talk about this in a minute, but this is a indicates layer visibility icon, and I'm going to turn that off because what you will see now are it's a checkerboard pattern, and that indicates transparency. So if I add layers that are empty, basically this transparency will not increase my file size, and always this transparency is always indicated by this checkerboard. Okay, so what's my advantages? Why do I have layers in Photoshop? So obviously the ability to rearrange layers in a different stacking order, being able to modify specific objects, effects, styles, or even type on separate layers, and to modify them individually. The disadvantage is obviously file size. So the more layers I get here in my layers panel, the more Photoshop has to remember, and my file size will get large, and they get large pretty quickly. So multiple layers can make a very large file. And the other thing, if my layers are not very well organized, it can be extremely confusing. So make sure you stay organized, that you label them descriptively, and using some other tools that we'll talk about in a little bit. Alright, so I can add and I can delete and I can move layers. Okay, so that's something I can do with layers. I can drag a portion of one image onto another image. I can hide and display layers. I can change what we call the opacity. So let me just turn on this flower layer and show you we've got a lot of things happening up here. And if I just target opacity, opacity is like transparency. So if I have 0% opacity, I'm 100% transparent. 100% opacity is 0% transparent. So I have the ability to change that with my layers. Let's just identify some of these pieces here so that you know what to look for. So of course my layers are stacked right here in the middle. I do have a name for each layer. I do get a thumbnail, and I can increase this thumbnail size by going to my options menu. Alright, so I have a lot of options in here for my menu. If I go to panel options, I'm able to change my thumbnail size. So if your eyes aren't so good, or you just like to see things larger, I'll increase my thumbnail size to the largest that I can, and you'll see that they do increase. Now what happens though is the whole layer takes up a little bit more space. So multiple layers, you can see, depending on your preference, you might want to see more of those layers, so you'd want to decrease that thumbnail size. And the thumbnail, really, it's just a miniature picture of what's on that layer. I can use color for organizing these layers as well. If I do a right click on a layer, a pop-up menu appears, and I'm able to color code my layers. This has nothing to do with what's on that layer. It's just a color code, or as an organizational tool, kind of like I just highlighted it with a highlighted color. Nothing of that color will appear on my layer. At the bottom, I have a few icons here, and we're not going to get into all of these icons in this lesson, but I'll explain what they are, working from right to left. So the first one is the trash, and this allows me to throw away a layer. My second, this is to create a new layer. So if I click that, I get a new layer. The second one is a layer group, and if I click that, I get a new layer group. Again, these things will be described in more detail in future recordings. This is to create an adjustment layer. An adjustment layer is a type of layer a little bit different, a little bit more advanced, as is the next one, layer mask. Here's my layer styles or effects, and this is the ability to link layers. At the top, I showed you the options menu that drops down. I also have some other advanced features here. I do have a blending mode as well, which we'll talk about in the future, the transparency or opacity. Here are some lock options. So I can lock my transparent areas. I can lock the image pixels. This is just a safeguard that to make sure that nothing accidentally gets changed. This will allow me to lock my position, and this locks the entire layer, so I'm not able to do any editing on a specific layer. All right, so there's just an overview of layers, and in future recordings we'll go into much more detail.